Hi, everyone. Good. It's lunch hour time. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. I am Shenzhan with my colleague Yongqiang. Yongqiang, could you turn on your video, please?
Oh.
Yeah. So my colleague Yongqiang and I will host today's Lunch and Learn session. Here, we learn to read aloud a classical Chinese poem, one session at a time. A poem that we will select with the hope to speak to the sentiment we feel in today's world. And together, we also learn a wide range of Chinese language, culture, history, art, and music, etc. It's a little bit flexible every session, so please stay tuned and ready to be surprised. Today's surprise, some of you may have received the sneak peek email, is calligraphy. I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker after we read aloud together of the selected poem today. As a reminder, the session will be recorded and also will be available on our YouTube channel. Please stay muted unless we invite you to ask questions, share comments, or when we get into the breakout session to practice, just to make sure that everyone will have an uninterrupted experience today. All right, so with that, I will ask Yongqiang to please share your screen with the PowerPoint of today's poem. And Yongqiang, just because my internet may be a little bit slow today, if there's any audio issue, please just let me know.
Okay, so could you see the PowerPoint now?
It's fine. If you can, yeah, I'm still, 可以看到哈? Yeah, great. So let me see, maybe I will just, from my end, I cannot see, but I can still make this work. All right, today we are reading 宋有人. And Yongqiang, if you could move your mouse over the Chinese character when I'm speaking or reading the Chinese character of the PowerPoint, that will be great. Thank you. So today we are reading 宋有人. Sorry, 宋有人. Departing is a very common theme in China's classical poetry, as is reflected in life. Imagine in ancient time, without any modern means of transportation, it's very time consuming and taking a lot of effort to travel. Without any cell phone, Zoom, WeChat, WhatsApp, or at least emails to stay connected, we could imagine friends. When friends are saying goodbye to each other, the emotions may be very different from how we feel today. Nevertheless, for whatever reason, perhaps because maybe traveling becomes unimaginably difficult, more difficult in this past 11 months, we selected this poem. Hopefully it resonates, especially during this time. Next slide, please. This is one of the most famous departing poems by Li Bai, whom was born in Tang Dynasty in 701 AD. He is arguably the most celebrated poet in China's history. Some of you may remember last April, we introduced Li Bai and his reputation as 诗仙, celestial of poetry, referring to his poetry as so powerful, direct, yet natural, as if Li Bai possesses or is possessed by the kind of talent only celestials or supernatural beings may have. 宋有人 is another example. Next slide, please. Let's take a look at the entire poem first. It is almost a textbook, well-constructed, geniusly regulated verse, 律诗. 8 lines. So each, on this PowerPoint, each line has 2 lines of the poem. Every 2 lines as a pair. As usual, I will read aloud the entire poem first and invite you to listen and also to take a look and pay attention to the English translation next to it. Most of us perhaps know we will not get into the detail of explaining the meaning of this poem. So this is the best time to get the gist of the meaning of what the poem is describing. And I will explain a little bit this time going into I would say, the limitation of translation, especially of poetry or Chinese classical poetry. So I will read from the top. 宋有人，青山横北郭，白水绕东城。此地一为别，孤蓬万里征。浮云游子意，落日故人情。挥手自兹去，萧萧斑马鸣。All right, let's get into individual lines. Next slide, please. As usual, I will read twice. You can see there are 4 lines on this PowerPoint. The first one is the pronunciation, pinyin. The second is the characters. The third line highlighted in blue is the literal meaning of each character. And then the last line is the poetic translation of the entire line. I will read only the Chinese characters twice. The first time, I will pause after each character. You are muted, but you can hear yourself, you can hear me, please read after me. And the second time, I will read the entire line, each line, and read after me. All right, let's start. 青山横北郭，青山横北郭，白水绕东城。白水绕东城。Next. 此地亦为别，此地亦为别，孤蓬万里征。孤蓬万里征。Next, please. 浮云游子意。浮云游子意。 落日故人情落日故人情。Next. 挥手自资去，挥手自资去，萧斑马鸣，萧斑马鸣。Next, please. So that's the entire poem. We just read it. It's only 40 characters if you count each character. Here is the entire poem again. We know there's always something lost in translation. In the case of translating a Tang poem or any Chinese classical poem, the essence of the poetic beauty, I have to say, is unfortunately largely lost, to the point that we touched upon this last time. If you just look at the English translation, it may be hardly recognizable that it is this poem. And it may appear perhaps even puzzling if you just look at the English translation, why the Chinese poem and Li Bai have such a high status to begin with. Maybe that's just my assumption. Poems always carry more than just the literal meaning. In the case of Chinese classical poems, I will invite you to keep in mind each character in the poem has at least 3 layers. The pictographic writing, each representing an image. The sound, each with a distinctive tone, giving the image a musical layer. And it's part of the regulated verse, or in general, the classical Chinese poetry, that the rising tones and the falling tones have to complement each other. For example, the first line, Qing Shan, the 2 characters in the first line are both rising tones. And then the first 2 characters in the second line, Bai Shui, both are falling tones. Qing Shan paired up with Bai Shui. This is just a very simple example. Of course, well, the rules for writing a regulated verse is so much more complicated. If you are interested in this, I would encourage you to look into the course offered by Mr. Ben Wang. He's the senior lecturer at China Institute. Every semester, he has a course, dive deep into the classical Chinese poetry. So you will get so much more from this 1 hour that we just can only touch upon and scratch the very surface of the classical poetry. And the third one, of course, is the meaning that the character represents. All of the 3 layers must be carefully arranged by the poet so that individual characters come together, woven into an image that conveys meanings and emotions, and at the same time musical. In Li Bai's case, reading his poems like this one, at least it could make me feel he could arrange these 40 characters so effortlessly, yet the imagery and the sound strike the heart of one's emotion regarding friends departing from each other. All of that I cannot get from the English translation. And just a little bit more, to my surprise, I came across a passage by Zhang Didion in one of her early essays, Why I Write, in 1976, as I was preparing for today's session. She says, the arrangement of the words matters, and the arrangement you want can be found in the picture in your mind. The picture dictates the arrangement. The picture dictates whether this will be a sentence with or without clauses, a sentence that ends hard, or a dying for sentence. Long or short, active or passive. The picture tells you how to arrange the words, and the arrangement of the words tells you, or tells me, what's going on in the picture. Of course, she's talking about writing in English, but all I can do is to invite you to get the general meaning from the translation, but more importantly, try to picture the image that derives from the poem that forms in your mind as you read it. So with that, let's just read the entire poem one more time together from the title. 送友人 青山横北郭，白水绕东城。此地一为别，孤蓬万里征。浮云游子意，落日故人情。挥手自兹去，萧萧斑马鸣。Next slide, please. Speaking of imagery and language, there is a much more direct form, calligraphy. These are some random calligraphy of this very poem I found online. Yongchan, can you please click? Not only the writing characters themselves are images, the images can be highly stylized. Each line of the character as an expression of the calligrapher, him or herself. So these two are two very different calligraphies of this one poem. If you look at the very right line vertically, reading vertically, you can see the first two characters, Qing Shan, in the sort of yellow background picture image, and the one next to it. You can compare that style is very different. And the next page, please. And another two examples of the same poem, but in very different style. These two are running style or running and cursive style. For over 2000 years, calligraphy has developed into a high art form with tremendous traditions. Schools of great calligraphers, in fact, poets, were almost certain to write calligraphy as well. And some are great calligraphers like Su Shi. We have read his poem and looked at his calligraphy very briefly previously. It's a very live tradition that continues until today. These calligraphies of the poem, frankly speaking, these are not from great calligraphers. They are probably very bad calligraphies, but nevertheless, they are the living examples of the tradition that's very live today. I'm not a calligrapher myself, but I'm very glad to have Mr. Cao Chuan, a beloved calligraphy instructor from China Institute here to talk and demo more about calligraphy. Cao 老师, could you please turn on your camera?
Yep.
曹老师 studied. Yeah.
Okay.
And Yongqiang, if you can stop sharing the PowerPoint, that would be great. Cao 老师 studied studio art in the US, while his passion and learning started at the age of 8. Of calligraphy continue all these years in Chinese calligraphy history, especially bronze inscriptions, seal inscription, and Wei style calligraphy. He studies and practices calligraphy daily and has taught, presented, and showcased calligraphy at China Institute and the Met. So I will turn the floor to, or the platform, the Zoom window to Cao 老师. It's all yours.
Yep. Thank you very much, Shenzhan. Thanks for inviting me, and it's great to be with everybody. In this, I personally have struggled with exactly what I want to prepare, present today, just because the shorter the presentation, actually, contrary to popular belief, the shorter the presentation, I find it the more difficult, just because, in my mind, calligraphy is such a broad range of topics that is so difficult to cover in such a short period of time. But I actually, before I, talk about calligraphy, I want to spend maybe just a minute talking about, how Chinese poetry, calligraphy, painting, perhaps seal carving, and just to some extent, even extending beyond that, to even, traditional Chinese music, how they're all, culturally intertwined and interrelated. Poem, for example, I think with the Chinese language, for the poems that you just read or the poems that you have read before, shared by Shenzhan, really epitomizes, painting with words, so I guess firstly, I just want to echo, a lot of the things that, that Shenzhan shared before moving on to calligraphy. And Shenzhan also made a very good point about, the calligraphy that she showed at the end, which I think one important thing to note is these are living examples of calligraphy and its different, and she shows the stylistic differences between some of the modern, maybe amateur calligraphers. They may not be the best form of calligraphy, but it's a way to inform you, for you to realize and see the different kinds of calligraphy that exists. In order to get just a very quick taste, if you will, of this. And the other thing I want to very quickly talk about, before I get onto my real topic of the day, is I personally like to watch a lot of cooking shows, especially during the pandemic, when we're confined to our homes. And what I also what I hear and see all the time is, when you see a chef presenting and cooking, he or she will always say that in addition to all the ingredients, the most special sauce or ingredient there is, in terms of cooking, is love. Because without love and passion, it's hard for the food, for people to enjoy your food, and for you to put your efforts into the food for others to enjoy. And I say that because in actuality, for calligraphy, for Chinese art, especially calligraphy, there's also a secret ingredient, other than, in addition to, sorry. So there's also, so with Chinese, sorry, I just got a little bit interrupted earlier, So with Chinese calligraphy, it's interesting in that there's also a little bit of a secret ingredient, and that's emotion. If you don't put your emotion into your calligraphy, no matter how technically sound or how technically elegant, your presentation or calligraphy is, it's very, very difficult for that to become a piece of art that could be carried down, for ages to come. And that emotion, ranges and again, we don't have, unfortunately, the time to show all of the different sort of emotions within calligraphy. Those emotions can range from happiness, to sadness, to one of anger. So again, with that said, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I hope it.
Thank you.
Co-host.
先看你的字。
I'm sorry.
先看你的字。
Okay, that's fine.
就知道了。
Okay.
就像尝一口。
So so this is my studio. So this morning, just before I did my presentation, I took the day off today. And it's going to be hard to showcase it here. So this is a sort of a scroll, that I did copying, which is copying Wang Xizhi's Shiqi Tie. Okay, it's something that I am going to talk about today. Which is a collection of Wang Xizhi, one of China's most famous calligraphers, from the Qing Dynasty. It's a collection of his 17 letters, okay, which people throughout history have copied time and time again. And another one that I could sort of quickly show, for example, could be here, if for those interested.
Did you write out today's poem? 今天的诗你有没有写出来？
No, I did not.
Too bad.
So these are, of a different style, okay? Okay, which is known in English as clerical script, in Chinese as Li Shu, okay? So this is another sort of a stylistically different presentation, and it's hard to know, how everybody's different exposure to calligraphy. So I'll show just a couple of more, not expecting this request. So let me just get it. Here's two more. Okay. One of what's known as the 10 drums, 十鼓文, okay? It's this is from the sort of the pre-unification of China, right? During maybe the 200 to 500 years before Qing Dynasty, the unification from the Qing Dynasty, okay? And it's the Qing Seal. This is the script that precedes, for example, small seal script. And this is what Shenzhan briefly mentioned earlier, bronze inscription, which are stuff that are carved, usually commemorative plates and things like that, or events that are carved onto plates that were given from kings, not emperors, because back then it wasn't unified, given by local lords, I should say, not even kings. They call themselves kings, but given by local lords to their respective, for example, attendants, as ways to commemorate an event or a thing or a sacrifice. So this here is typical of the bronze inscriptions from what we call the warring states, okay? Spring and autumn period / warring states, okay? And maybe one more example very quickly for those interested. I'll show just as an end, before we go on to sharing of the screen, okay? Maybe again, this is very impromptu. I didn't expect a request like this. So just something that I recently did, okay? So I don't paint too much because because I'm very busy at work. I have a full-time job that's not related to art. So this, for example, is one of the four big topics in Chinese art, or basic Chinese art, which is the Four Gentlemen. And this, of course, is the famous orchid, probably the first of the gentlemen. Okay, and we have, this shows. I don't have the seal, stamp just yet because I just recently finished it. But this is just a small piece of practice showcasing, I guess, how calligraphy and and painting or ink painting, are interrelated, and they should be viewed as one. Okay, and real Chinese scholars, of the past would paint, write, and include their calligraphy. And some would argue that they would also need to be seal, successful seal carvers, so that this is a cohesive art form. And this is also why the Chinese scholar never put degrees, if you will, in nowadays in modern society, a degree is very important, right? So whatever you major in, be it literature, or I mean, obviously I'm talking about the literary fields. You need to have a special degree that proves that you're an expert in your field. With Chinese art, it's a very unique thing in that there isn't really one major, or it's not really defined by 4 years of education that could just make you become, all of a sudden expert, in Chinese art. So this here is Mei Hua, okay, plum blossom, and the inscription here, just because I feel like it's a good balance of or unifies the concept rather well of small script, of a small seal script, or otherwise just known as seal script. 遥知不是雪，为有暗香来. Okay, so this is just another example. So the thing that I actually want to spend some time talking about today, let me just see how we're doing on time. The thing I want to spend some time talking about today, I'm going to share my screen. Has to do with one of Wang Xizhi's 17 letters. It's actually, I had a lot of, I was very indecisive because there were so many different choices that I could present with. I toyed with the idea of maybe presenting seal script, talking about that, but I always do seal script. So for me, I think I take it upon as a personal challenge today to talk about something different, something that's outside of my comfort zone, which is, more of a running or grass script, 草书, okay, 行草 actually, it's in between running script and grass script. But I don't think any of the stuff that I will present today will offer any solution or answer any large questions, such as, what is good? I mean, my goal, of course, is to talk about what is good calligraphy, what is defined, what defines good calligraphy. But again, it's such a broad range of topics that gets involved, in that it's no different, it's not dissimilar from a person asking, what's the meaning of life? It's not something that we could talk about in the 20 or 30 minutes that I have with you guys. But instead, it's like a person asking, what's good Italian food? What's good Chinese food? If you've never had Chinese food, if you've never had Italian food, the only thing I could tell you is, let me cook you a dish, so that you could see what good calligraphy or good, what a good dish tastes like. And for the same reason here, what is good calligraphy? Instead of answering the question directly by talking about using technicalities and many different, jargons, let me just show you what I think a great piece of calligraphy looks like, and how that ties together, I guess, with kind of the topic today. I mean, again, this is one of Wang Xizhi's 17 letters, okay, collected, that was sort of carved onto perhaps a wooden, tablet during the Song Dynasty, okay, as requested by one of the Song Dynasty, the Song emperors at the time. And I'll very quickly just first read, and then talk about what its large meaning. Okay, again, this is a last minute decision. So I truth be told, I didn't spend too much time prepping, for what I was gonna talk about. So it's gonna be very largely impromptu in nature, okay? So 季与足下, and again, I'll show you the actual translation in just a second, or the actual words in just a second. 季与足下别念6年，于今虽识书虽识书问，不解括怀。省足下先后2书，但增叹慨，清积雪凝寒，50年中所无，想清如常，积来夏秋来夏秋间，或复得足下问耳。笔者悠悠，如何可言? That's it. Okay, this is one of, and this letter ends right here. Okay, it's large meaning, and I'll read this again with the actual words in just a second. Okay, 季与足下别念6年. Okay, it's a very short. Most of the letters at the time that he's, are very short, and of course they take a long time to deliver. Because Wang Xizhi, I don't know how this is dependent on everybody's familiarity with Chinese calligraphy and history, lived in the period that's roughly 300 AD, okay, right, after. And again, he, like most of the scholars back then, was associated, okay, and worked in government, okay. And the Wang and Xie family, again, one of the 2 big families of its time, are known for their scholastic achievements, along with their very famous calligraphic, I guess, endeavors of their time. So much so that Wang Xizhi, anybody who knows Chinese history, Chinese calligraphy, Chinese art, Chinese literature, will probably know the big name, Wang Xizhi. So again, 季与足下别念6年, okay? So according to my calculations, he says, roughly, and again, this is a last-minute translation by me, so it's not going to be the most precise, but hopefully I get the basic idea down, okay? So according to my rough calculations, we have not seen each other, okay? It's been 26 years since we last, spent time together or last met. 语今虽识书问, even though we occasionally write to each other, and again, taking into consideration the fact that things take a long time to deliver. Okay, so it's not something, they don't email, they don't write to each other, and you're gonna get your USPS first class or a 3-day select, and receive letters that you exchange. So 不解括怀. So it's it makes me just it makes me think about our friendship, okay, and basically just emphasizing how he misses his friend, okay. 省足下先后2书，但增叹慨, okay. I have received and read through the 2 letters that you've sent, okay. And your letters only make me sort of yearn for more of our friendship. It's just this, again, the Chinese scholars' scholastic way of emphasizing and valuing that friendship, okay. 清, of late, okay, 积雪凝寒, sort of, and again, I picked this poem because I saw, on social network, I see Shenzhan published during one of the snowstorms recently. Shenzhan was actually, she sort of published one of the, or republished, showed her this poem and this piece of calligraphy maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago during the snowstorm. And I think it's very fitting of our times, and it's very fitting of the weather, of the cold weather. So he says here that of late, the land is covered by snow, and we're sort of in this unprecedented cold front. So much so that 50年中所无, this cold weather, is one in which we haven't experienced in 50 years. Okay, 想清如常. My guess is that you're doing, or I hope you're doing very well. Okay, 积来夏秋间. Okay, I hope that in the coming months, in the coming year, during the summer/autumn months, I will hear from you again. 或复得足下问耳，笔者悠悠如何可言? Again, the last phrase is really just nothing more than, again, him sort of commenting on the helplessness of the state of being, you know, and that could be pertaining to life in general, pertaining to old age. So the Chinese scholars really love to use letters and their personal short writing or essays just to let out their feeling that time is one of the most valuable things that we have in life, and it's something that that we can't grasp onto. So that's it. That's his letter to his friend. But just think about this, okay? In this day and age, you know, in such a busy society, you know, where we're inundated by work emails, by family obligations, you know, to who nowadays actually has the time, you know, whether it's in China or in America, to actually write a handwritten letter, not to mention a letter that is marked and replete with elegant, you know, calligraphy, such as this. I mean, again, something, so, you know, tying back all of this together and going back to what Shenzhan mentioned at the end of her poem, which was showing some of the more modern replicas, again, not by anyone famous, of this poem, you know. And when you look at this, a letter, a simple letter that is just to ask how a friend is doing during a snowstorm, okay, during a cold front, discussing the vicissitudes of life, maybe, the helplessness of old age, perhaps. Think about what that different, you know, how you think and how you perceive, and, you know, this is compared to what you saw before. And again, I don't think, like I said in the beginning, it's not something that we can cover, you know, in 15 minutes. I don't think it's something we can cover in, perhaps, you know, my understanding right now is only limited to what I know. I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. So I think I know a little bit about what calligraphy is, but I think in 10 years' time, as I gain a better perspective, as I gain more knowledge about Chinese calligraphy and about life maybe in general, my understanding of calligraphy will be perhaps totally different. So it's not something, again, I emphasize, that is answerable in 15 minutes time. It's something that takes a lifetime to appreciate and to understand, okay? And I do want to spend some time also in a bit, just maybe copying parts of the letter, just to show you, you know, you may think, a lot of people may think, okay, that this is something that, because it's running script, it takes a long, you know, very quickly to write. In reality, you know, just because something is, you know, a running script or 草书, okay, you actually don't write very quickly. You know, this is just giving you perhaps sometimes the illusion that this is done quickly, because this has nothing to do with speed. And that's just my interpretation of it, okay? As the person who's right, especially when you're in the stage of copying somebody's artwork or calligraphy, this is not something that is done quickly. Now, as the person, you know, these are people like Wang Xizhi. Back in the day, they don't have pens or pencils. He spent his entire life with a brush. So of course, you know, as he's writing this letter, his speed may be faster than what I'm about to show or what other calligraphers in today's age would demonstrate. But, you know, even then, you know, in order to create these very nuanced brush strokes, okay, you know, it's not something, again, that is done with great speed. So I want to emphasize that. Now, any questions, actually? I've said a lot in perhaps the 20 minutes that I've talked. before I move on to show a little quick demo, I want to ask to see if there are any questions that I can help answer.
Cao 老师, there is a question from the chat.
Okay.
When you showed your work, one question is, well, where did you get that long scroll?
Where did I get that? You mean paper?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Well, paper I bought. So there was a time. This is. I mean, I'd be happy to show. I have paper that I bought from both China and Taiwan, actually. So 10 years ago, when I was doing quite a bit more business traveling in my old job, and when you travel by business, you travel by business class. So I took advantage of, again, I don't think that's the case nowadays, of the fact that you are able to get 4, at least on the airline that I traveled on, 4 free, baggage, luggage of 70 pounds each. So I went, so I took a side trip. It was to Singapore, but in the name of saving the company money, I didn't fly direct to Singapore, but I flew with a connection to Shanghai and stayed at my grandparents' place, and bought, I believe, a total of maybe 40 of this size. This big, and the length is what you saw before, and this was cut in half. Okay, maybe 40 to 50 packets of these, with 100 sheets in each. Okay, so paper, Chinese paper, and by the way, people have a tendency to call all Chinese calligraphy and painting paper rice paper. That's a misnomer in every single way. Okay, there are different kinds of rice paper, and they're all termed rice paper. And even the Chinese would just call it xuanzi. It's not xuanzi. Xuanzi was something that was invented, or it's not invented, right? Paper, that began production or widely used maybe towards the end of Ming Dynasty and early Qing Dynasty. Okay, so that's only, and Xuan refers to Shenzhen, which is a part of China in Anhui province. Okay, there are many areas and locations in China that produces paper, all different kinds of paper made of different material. And so the paper in a nutshell comes from when I went back to China. And in recent years, I actually found a really great, now more expensive than mainland China, but much less expensive than Japan, where there is a paper shop in Taichung, okay, in literally in the center of Taiwan, in the mountains, where they produce, I think, very quality Chinese paper. One example, this is a mainland China imitation of the paper, because it's this thin. I mean, you could just see it's thinner than tissue paper. Okay, and just to give you a flavor of the different papers that are out there. And of course, you have size paper versus on-size paper, which marked by the biggest difference of which is one bleeds and one doesn't bleed when you play with water. So one is very amenable to ink play, the other is more amenable to maybe meticulous drawings, and one is again amenable to very spontaneous calligraphy versus the less bleeding ones, okay, the size ones, where it's for meticulous or small fonts. So again, knowing your tools, knowing your brushes, knowing the 4 treasures. What are the 4 treasures, right? In a Chinese studio, artist studio, right? 笔墨纸砚, right? Brush, the inkstone, the ink itself, the ink that you grind on the inkstone, 笔墨, and paper, right? So any other questions before I do get to the demo?
One more, perhaps, Cao 老师, also from the chat. Has the simplification of Chinese characters under Mao impacted the calligraphy at all? And after this, we will go into the demo. Yeah.
That's one terrific question. Absolutely terrific question. and one that I think I feel very strongly about. Again, my views have certainly changed over the years. And without going into much detail, expressing my political views about this matter, but I think my answer itself will lend itself in how I feel about the topic. So it has absolutely impacted Chinese calligraphy in every negative way possible, I think. The political, as with every topic, or debate point in life, there are pros and cons. So I think it's unfair to treat the question, from a calligraphy standpoint, I think it has nothing but negative impact, right? Perhaps from a social impact, and that's one where I have to do more research on, because I don't want to just sound like an extreme, too extreme of a person. If I don't know the topic very well, I think I need to respectfully step away and say I need to learn more a little bit about it. But my understanding at the time when the commies did that, was to increase literacy. So I think the intent was a good one, okay? And by the way, it's also very interesting. A lot of the new simplified words actually are a derivative of the Xingcao that we use these days. But going back to the root of the question, which is really calligraphy based, I think it has absolutely impacted Chinese calligraphy in a negative way, just because it's a fact, that's difficult to prove here, again, in this short period of time. That's universally known that when you write out Chinese characters, it just looks better in traditional form. There's a reason why our ancestors created the writing system and how the writing system have evolved over the years. I do think from that respect, I personally am a big believer in respecting tradition. That's, again, the impact is negative from a calligraphy standpoint. So it might be positive from a social standpoint, because China, as I do understand, has one of the lower, or perhaps some may argue lowest e-literacy, or has one of the highest literacy rates in the world. But again, experts might argue that that might be due to reasons other than simplification of the language, but more a focus on society as a whole, on public education and free education and other things, which is again beyond the topic of today's demo or presentation. So again, as you could see, calligraphy is something that I feel very, very passionate about, and it's something that that I really want to create more awareness, for both the Chinese people of Asian descent and for Western audience as well. So again, this is my sort of what I want to call debut as my demo debut of. Oh, let me stop sharing actually, so that you guys could see my screen. Oh, I think, Shenzhan, did you stop sharing for me?
I stopped it.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Thank you. Perfect. So I've never really done a Xingcao, demo before, just because I never felt comfortable that I was up to sort of the level that is appropriate for a demo with this. But I actually, during this past year in the pandemic, I've actually spent a little more time learning and spending time. By learning, it's really taking the time and effort to copy masters and getting more and more sort of aware, if you will, of the different nuances that take place, within. So I want to see something, okay? And this is something that I also feel very passionate about. In order to be good at something, whether or not, if you're a carpenter, if you're a plumber, if you're an artist, whatever profession you're in order to, or if you're a computer programmer or a developer, whatever it is, you need to have good tools. And the same goes with Chinese calligraphy and painting. Without good tools, you're not going to have good, good work, good artwork. So the brush that I'm using, okay, is a pure goat hair brush of this length. It's about, I want to say 1 inch, 2.5 to perhaps 3 inches in length, okay, goat hair, okay. And I ground the ink this morning, and the ink is now sitting in sort of my pot right here. I actually, because I do write a lot, I bought, for those interested, from Japan, a ink grinding machine that actually grinds ink for me. But I do have also stone tablets that I use to play so again, this being the brush, and I just want to see whether or not, just give me a second, okay? I haven't, the last time I did this with China Institute was in the summer, so it's been a while, and I'm going to make this a little bit even longer. So I want to see where my hand is. Yep, right here. Okay. And the reason, it's again, this is it's unfortunate that we're confined to this sort of mode of demoing, but I'm standing. Okay, in order to do it right, your hand, in my belief, is especially with running script, you should step away as far back as possible so that you get a bird's eye view of this, okay? And because I'm gonna try to stop talking because it's it kind of affects your flow, especially with again, look at the speed, okay? Now, I left my brush out for a long time, so it's a little dry. And get a little water on. Ji yu zu xia. This next one is bie, departed or said goodbye. As you're writing each word or character, actually, you'll notice one thing, or I will tell you what I'm experiencing. You hold your breath a little as you finish each stroke. So there are times when you're in the groove, you actually have to hold your breath. And I'm convinced that this is what people talk about when they say calligraphy. Sometimes, some people argue that it's good for one's health. I think there is a sort of a form of an aerobic exercise involved, that, and by the way, I'm very enthusiastic about this topic, and I usually get a little bit of I usually need to eat around, noon, and I had a little snack, but because I was so excited, when I get hungry, And I think some of you will notice it too, especially with calligraphy, and especially when you don't have anything holding against, you actually start to shake a little bit, due to your hunger. So it's very interesting. But, contrary to popular belief, a lot of times you'll see masters who are in their 80s or 90s who are still standing and writing. You'll see them really shaking. I mean, they're shaking for a different reason because of perhaps old age or, of physical conditions due to one's age, advanced years. But shaking does not connotate, it's not a negative connotation, just so you know. It's about, like I said, the emotions you put in addition to technical, technical artistry, if you will. This is nian, year, 26 years, okay? So I know that I've I've been quiet the past minute or two. What's interesting, hopefully that's sort of imparted during this sort of demo, again, is that as you're writing this, no matter how slow you are, there is still a little bit of a rhythm that you should see or that you should be able to sort of decipher as you're doing this. And that flow is what gives what I would call your calligraphy qi, okay, energy, that flows onto the paper. But again, I think the myth that we should debunk today is it looks like it's done with crazy speed. But in fact, you can see how many words I've written so far, especially when you're trying to copy words with such movement. It's an effort of eye-hand coordination with your eyes moving from the other page to your own. And as you and your brush and your fingers and your wrist, and when you're writing big words, with your whole body moving. So it's a holistic effort, okay? And maybe just a couple more. Xian hou, okay? So just for the time being, I'm going to put this before this dries up. So again, I haven't had a chance. Let me just look at this from top to bottom. You know, I wish, again, I'll use what I did earlier today, which will tie this up nicely to how this ends. But, you know, once this is done, you know, looking at each word sometimes, you know, a beautiful individual word doesn't make a great piece of calligraphy work, okay? That's something that people need to really realize and understand. It's looking at this holistically as one unit, so that even masterpieces, you're not going to have every single perfect word looking perfect. The idea is to judge it as a piece of artwork on the whole. Okay, so let's just assume that I did the whole piece. And this, by the way, this isn't one of the other letters, not even this one that we're talking about today. Okay, so let me just stand in front of it. So you could see, again, you want to give the feeling, right? But not do it so intentionally that every single word is connected directly with the other. You want to give a feeling that there's energy flowing onto the paper. And perhaps that energy may translate into emotion. One of fear, again, one of respect, one of hatred, one of happiness, one of love, whatever that emotion may be. This is taking, you know, calligraphy and Chinese art, you know, to a new level. You know, again, I'm going really from, you know, stepping away from this and talking about this on a very high level to focus on not just, you know, a hobby, for example, but to really talk about what constitutes a good piece of art. And by the way, I think all this theory, you know, if we ever have another chance to talk in the future, I think is all transferable to other areas, you know, of art. So I think at the end of the day, art is art, you know, be it Chinese art, Islamic art, Western, you know, Impressionism, postmodern. There's a set of rules, I think, that people live by, and that's what defines what good art is, you know. So at the highest level, there's a certain set of metrics, okay? And lastly, you know, if I want to sort of, you know, since I mentioned the word transferable, if I want to use a Western metric to define what Chinese art is, you know, one of the first things I learned, you know, when I, you know, back in high school, when I was doing, when I was getting myself into, I guess, watercolors or sketching or whatever, is the teacher telling us, you know, what yardstick do you use to judge a good piece of work? You know, the 5 simple sort of phrases are groove, you know, B, right, for balance, R for rhythm, U for unity, V for variety, and E for emphasis. And, you know, I also add, you know, especially with Chinese, you know, calligraphy, you know, you have to add emotion, you know, to this part as well. But if you just use these metrics to appreciate Chinese art, they're also transferable, you know. I mean, the varieties are, the rhythm is obvious. The balance, I think, is obvious. And, you know, the emphasis, where you put more energy and force, perhaps, to it is obvious. So I've already been over time, you know, over our time limit. But that, in a nutshell, that's just a nutshell. We're only scratching the surface here, is sort of, you know, what Chinese calligraphy and art really is. So.
Well, as we were watching your beautiful calligraphy and meditatively moving through the paper, yeah, I feel like I can barely notice the time has passed so fast. And thank you so much. And also, it's from the wonderful comments in the chat room that our participants share how much this is appreciated. And thank you so much for your passion, for sharing your calligraphy, And also while taking the time off, the time, which is most important, and you are doing this all voluntarily. I do invite everyone, if you are interested in calligraphy, please, Mr. Cao Laoshi will, I'm looking forward to the future that you offer calligraphy class again at China Institute. So that we can all learn more and practice together. And also I want to particularly thank you for choosing 17贴韩式积雪 sorry, I forgot 积雪凝寒贴 today. As well, it really, I feel, complements the poem as friends departed from each other. This is in ancient time how scholars would communicate beautifully about friendship. And through the means of calligraphy and letters written in calligraphy.
Yeah,
so
it's
really,
in the future, Shenzhan, maybe we'll do occasionally, with time permitting, talk about, just to spend time talking about Su Shi or any one of the more, perhaps less famous or even more famous, well-known calligraphers and their pieces. There's a lot to be analyzed. All right.
Yep, absolutely. Wow, I'm glad you offered that. And I look forward, I'm sure we are looking forward to it. Thank you so much. And thank all of you joining us today. Next Lunch and Learn will be in April. Please do register. Every session we need you to register the session, and we look forward to see you next time. And 谢谢曹老师 again.
Anytime.
And 谢谢永强.